Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. In today's video, we're going to be making this. So we have these dominoes and they're just falling down along and the dominoes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you've probably seen a video like this. There's tons of them on Instagram and YouTube. I said I'd give it a go, make a tutorial out of it. So we're going to be doing this from start to finish. We're going to be doing this using Cinema 4D, Redshift and After Effects. So let's get started on this. Here we go. Okay guys, so starting off you're going to have the movie sequence, which is just the video footage as an image sequence, and the Dominoes Cinema 4D file downloaded. So we're going to be jumping into After Effects and we're going to be importing in the video sequence. So let's bring that in. And this is, I exported this out as in 24 frames per second. So just make sure to select the footage or the sequence, hit Control Alt G to interpret the footage as 24 frames per second and just click OK. Now we can drag this down and release it over this little composition icon. That'll create a new comp for us. If I select the comp and hit Control K, you'll see it's 24 frames per second, 1920 by 1080. So this is the footage and we're going to be tracking the camera. So some of you have asked me, why do I sometimes track in Cinema 4D and sometimes in After Effects? Well, it just depends really on the footage. Like, you know, something like this, it's pretty basic and there's nothing I want to mask out of being tracked. So it's just a lot quicker in this case to do it in After Effects. So go to Effect. Let's actually do a file save as first of all. And we're going to save this into the Dominoes large folder or wherever you want it. Dominoes large. And now we can go Effect, Animation actually, and Track Camera. So that's going to calculate how long it's going to take. So I'll pause the video here and then we'll pop back in once that's done. Okay, so that has finished doing its business and you can see now we have a bunch of track points. And as we move the camera along, the track points stay in position. They're following along with whatever pixel they decided to attach themselves to. So now we need to create a camera. And we can do that. So this target size is very big, so we can just reduce the size of that. Not necessary at all, just so we can see it better. Just reduce the size of this target size. And now we can just find pretty much any position here and we can right click and go to create solid and camera. So now we can watch this. If we just hit play, you'll see that the track is decent because, you know, the track solid's staying firmly placed onto the floor. It's stuck to the floor. It's not slipping around or sliding. So it's looking pretty good. And as that goes, that continues on. So we lose sight of it here. So we can just create like another solid here. Again, this step isn't necessary. Just so we can test the entire camera track. Cool. So that's done. So now all we have to do is export this so we can use it in Cinema 4D. We'll do a quick file save. And now we're going to go File and Export to, we're going to use the Maxon Cinema 4D exporter. So that's just going to take a couple of seconds to load. So just ignore this, that's fine. It's telling you it's found the 2D layers that will not be exported. That's okay. And we are going to export this out. It's going to be a Cinema 4D file. We'll just call this Dominoes large also, or whatever you want. And just hit enter on that. So now if we jump into Cinema, we can then open up that file. Which is here, dominoeslarge.c4d. So open that up. And now if we play that, you can see that we have our camera. if I just deactivate the camera, you'll be able to see our camera moving around just as our real life camera did. So that's cool. And you'll notice as well in the project settings, if you can't see this, just hit Control D and the project has automatically been set to 24 frames per second. So too has it been in the render settings, which is great. And if it hasn't, just make sure you set that. So that's our camera there. That's all good to go. Okay, so now we're going to be switching over to Redshift, and we're just going to be setting up our backplate, so that we can see our footage, in our viewport, in our Redshift render view. Now this has changed from, I'm using the 23.2, so this used to be the case where you'd add a dome light and you'd put your backplate into your dome light, but that's no longer the case. Now the background is inside the Cinema 4D camera. So the way you used to do it would be, where am I? Dome light is here actually. So you get your dome light and there used to be a little backplate function that you could select. You could put the footage into there. So that's no longer the case. So we'll just turn that dome light off for now because we will be needing one of those in a minute. But the way we do it now is we have to use a Redshift camera. And it's a bit tricky because, well, we tracked our footage in After Effects and it's given us this standard camera. And we're no longer able to add a Redshift camera tag either with the latest update. So if I go to camera tags, Redshift camera is not there anymore. So the workaround for this is just to create a Redshift camera, make it a child of the tracker camera. And now if we activate it and just hit play, it's doing the same thing for us. It's following along with the parent camera. It's just that we are able to now, in the Redshift camera, go into the new background tab. And now this is where we can load in our backplate, our movie sequence. So just click on override and let's go to this little folder here. And I have it in here in movie sequence. Let's just double click on that and say no. And then everything else is the same with regards to, you click on the animation tab, you set the mode to simple, and you're going to set the frame rate to 24. Click on detect frames. And now it's not going to play back for us in our viewport, which is, be nice if it did, but it doesn't. We go into our Redshift, into the Redshift render view. And now if we hit this play here, you'll see that it's going to play back for us. So that is that. So next, I suppose we can just set up this dome light. Let's turn this on. And I'm going to go over to my content browser. I'm going to grab a HDRI from here. Just search for HDRI. And the one I'm going to use is, I'm not quite sure which one I used for this before. Something that has trees and grass in it anyway. Could be that one. It's a bit too bright looking. Yeah, this one looks kind of like what we're working with in our real footage. So if I just download that, and I'll just drag this into the texture field here for our dome light. And now you can see that that's given us a bit of lighting in our scene. Cool. Do a file and save. And we can just stop rendering this. So now what we can do is jump back into standard, and we can then open up the Dominoes file that you would have downloaded at the start. So let's open this up. So here I have a bunch of dominoes that you guys can use for this tutorial and whatever else you'd like to use them for. They're pretty good. They're okay models. They're not the best. They're pretty, the mesh is pretty dense, but I just found these online and it was like that. Pretty much. I just retextured them with Redshift textures. So let's grab, we're going to grab the cloner. Hit Control C and let's just pop this into our scene. Control V. So at the moment it's like really small. It's actually, I think it's like life size. You know, if I brought in a figure here, it's actually to scale, we'll say. So let's just go into our default camera. I'm going to hit S on my keyboard so that it's going to focus into the dominoes. You can see that they're about life size, maybe a bit smaller. So we're going to scale these up. Jump back into the Redshift camera, and we can just scale these up. I'm actually going to jump into my 3D camera tracker. No, I'll stick to the Redshift camera. And let's scale up the... We'll just select all of these. Select the first one, hit Shift, hold down Shift and select the last one, and we'll just scale all of these up. Keep scaling, keep scaling, keep scaling. Let me just turn my phone on silent for a second. Okay. So now if we have a look at these, we've scaled all these up. They all look like they've scaled to different sizes, have they? I think they have. Oh no, they haven't. They have not. But we probably shouldn't scale them that way because it seems to be messing stuff up with regards to the cloner. So what we can do is just scale up by using the cloner. Just scaled all those up with the cloner selected. So we're just essentially scaling up the cloner. Okay. Go a bit further. Something like that. Back to my Redshift camera. And we're going to... So these are all zeroed out at the moment on the X, Y, Z. So let's, if we just check that we want to zero them all out. Each of these, they all need to be zeroed out. So let's do that now. Let's just select all of them. And let's go 0, 0, 0, so that they're all zeroed out on the X, Y, and the Z. And then what we do is we can grab our cloner and we can just start positioning this the way we want it to be. So you can see that it's not actually on the floor, right? So if we jump into our right view, so first of all, if we look at these track solids, they should be on the floor. And we're considering, we'll consider this horizontal line, which is world center. We'll consider that to be world center. So what we can do is just grab the Dominoes large null that we got from After Effects. And we can just reposition this so that these are going to be flat on our world center floor, on our world floor. So I'm just kind of doing this. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm using R on my keyboard to rotate or to select the rotation tool, and then E to get my move tool. Let's jump into the front view and let's just tweak this even more. We can actually just fiddle with it here a bit as well. So if you want to make very small changes to the value, hold down Alt and it won't move around as quickly. Yeah, okay, so that's close enough to the floor. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Could be a little bit more perfect though. And then I'm going to go back into the right view. And yeah, that looks good. Okay. So now it looks like our dominoes are on the floor because we just adjusted this null, and this null contains all of our cameras and track solids and everything. So now our dominoes actually look like they're just laying down on the grass. So let's see. So we've adjusted the rotation here of this. That's fine. So we're just positioning now our dominoes. So we want them to kind of be along an imaginary line. They're going to be falling against each other kind of in this direction, we'll say. So we need to make them upright, make them stand up. So we can go into our cloner, go to the transform tab, and we can just start rotating these. So this is going to be 90, we'll say. This is going to be 90 to make them stand up. And we want them all to be on the floor. So the axis or the pivot point, the axis handle is to the center of our dominoes. So that's fine for now, but once we put the step effector into our cloner, it's going to give us a bit of trouble. So what's the step effector going to do? Well, we'll just have a look at that now. We select our cloner, and let's get the step effector, which is here. Let's just invert this, flip horizontal. So you can see that it's making gradual increases to the scale of each domino as it goes along, which is what we want, okay? But because the axis handle or the pivot point for each domino is in the center, it's scaling them up from the center. We wanted to scale them up from the bottom of each domino. So we're going to have to get that axis center down to the very bottom of each of our dominoes. So let's just deactivate the step effector for now. And let's see how we're going to go about doing this. So what we can do is, if we just turn off our cloner, now we have all of our, let's just go into our default camera. Now we have all of our dominoes. So we have this one, we have this one, we have this one, so on and so forth. Just going to undo all that. So we need to, first of all, middle mouse click on the first domino, which is this, contains the subdivision surface, and the child, which is the actual geometry. Then we're going to go right click, connect objects, and delete. And we're going to do that for each of them. Hang on a second now, let's see what that's done. Okay, so that's actually changed the rotation for us. So we don't want to do that. Okay, let's see. So I think what we're going to need to do first of all is actually zero out the cloner again. Now I know we've already positioned this, but bear with me. We're zeroing out the cloner so that when we connect objects and delete on the actual subdivision surface, it's not going to give us like, it's not going to give us any values in the position or rotation, because we don't want it to do that for this step. So let's do it like this for now. And then we click on this, the first subdivision surface, middle mouse clicks so that it selects the parent and all of the children, right click, connect objects and delete. So now everything is still zeroed out on the geometry. So that's what we want. Let's middle mouse click again on the second one, right click, and then connect objects and delete. And let's just keep doing this for each of our dominoes. Or domino, whatever the plural of domino is. I think it's dominoes. Okay. So now if we reactivate our cloner again, they're all going to be standing up again, which is fine. And if we activate our step, it's still not doing what we want, because we have yet to put the axis handle, the axis center, the pivot point, we still have to put it down to the bottom of each of our dominoes. So let's deactivate the cloner and the step again. So quick way of doing this is just selecting all of the dominoes, hit Shift C to bring up the new commander, which we can then type in, I think it's called axis something. Yeah, axis center. So let's double click on that. And now we can, so we want it to be down the bottom, we'll say. This is our Z-axis handle. Let's bring this down to -100, hit execute. And now all of our axis, all of our pivot points for each of our domino geometries have all been pushed down to the very bottom, which is exactly what we want. So now if we reactivate the cloner and reactivate the step, now you can see we have what we were going for. They're all being scaled from the very bottom of each of the dominoes. Super. Okay, so if we jump back into our Redshift camera, now we can start positioning the cloner. So use R on your keyboard to select your rotation tool, and we can hit E to move this around. So we're going to start from maybe around here. Maybe rotate that a little bit more. And we can increase the number of clones as well to like maybe that amount, we'll say. Move this forward, go to our step effector, go into the parameter tab, and we can just increase the scale on this so that they're going to get a lot bigger. And we can, so this is going to be, so that's fine for now, right? We also need a step effector which is going to create some distance between each of our domino, right? So if this one hits this one, it'll be fine. And if this one hits this one, but you can see these ones are too close together. So we don't want that. So this is our scale step effector. We'll just call this scale step. And we're going to create another one. Select your cloner. Let's create another step effector. And this one is going to be step position. And now we're going to be affecting only position for this one. So we can start pushing these further away from each other. We're using the y-axis here. So now you can see that we're actually getting a bit more distance between each of these. Let's grab our cloner and push this further up. And I'd say grab the scale step and just start scaling that up even more. And maybe we'll go for like a few more cloners. We'll go for 15. And if we jump into our default camera, this is where we need to start messing around with the, I'll do a file save, with the step position effector. So let's select this, which is affecting only position. We'll go into the effector tab and let's right click on this spline here, this spline graph, and we can show this in a separate window. Now we just have to do a bit of twiddling around with this so we can get these dominoes at the start a bit closer together and these dominoes at the end a bit further apart. So let's grab this one and see what that does. So yeah, I mean, this is just a matter now of kind of messing around with this, trying to get it closer to what we need it to be. So that one is okay. I think this is the one I'm looking for. So we're pushing, trying to push the smaller ones a bit closer together. And we're trying to have the larger ones a bit further apart. What we can do is we can just move this out of the way. We can go to our cloner and increase the distance here a bit more. So we have a bit more wiggle room. And I want to jump into my Redshift camera just to make sure that we're not like going to be too close to this goalposts. You know, we want these to fall in the field, we'll say. Let's do a file save, and then we can go back into our step position. Let's right click and show this in a separate window again. Jump back into my default camera and start playing a bit more with this. Okay, so that could be something. we can certainly give this a try. Now, this is a bit too close. Maybe if we like create another, so I held down Control and just clicked to create another anchor point on this spline graph. So now we have a bit more control, we'll say, over there. Let's see. Still not what I want. Okay, so that's, yeah, okay. So the gaps here are much bigger than the smaller gaps, but we'll give this a blast and see what happens. So by a blast, I mean we'll get the dynamics rocking. We'll tip this one over, which this one is very far away from it. I'm not even sure that that's even going to touch it. I think we need to do something about that before we try. So let's bring this up again. And let's try and pull these ones a bit closer together. So I think I'm going to delete this. This isn't doing me any favors. Okay, so that's a bit better, I think. Okay, I think that should barely touch it. Okay. See, now these are all too close together. Okay, we're just going to give this a try as is. Again, I mean, with this spline graph, I mean, if I kind of knew what I was doing with this, it might be a bit easier, but I'm just kind of winging it, I suppose. So let's just give this a go and see what happens. So we're going to add a rigid body tag to our cloner. So we're going to right click, go to bullet tags and create a rigid body tag. So now if we hit play on this, let's give this a second to load. Now if we hit, let's do a file save as well, always a good idea before you start messing with dynamics. Hit play. So they're going to all fall into the abyss. We need a floor. So let's create a plane. And we're going to scale this up. Rotate it a bit. Move it over a bit. And let's just scale it up so it's nice and big. Okay, so that's our floor. We can turn off these track solids now. Don't need to see them anymore. And we'll make sure that our floor is just beneath the dominoes. Cool. So now if we hit play, we need to add a collider tag onto our floor. So right click, go to bullet tags and grab a collider body tag. Now if we hit play, you'll see that our floor is catching the dominoes. So we need to tip this one over. This first one needs to be tipped over. So let's grab a cube, go into our top view, and let's move this cube down here just in front of our first domino. We'll make sure that the face of the cube is level with the face of the domino. And we can just bring this up a bit so it's not touching the floor. And we can set up a keyframe for XYZ. Just click on this little keyframe button for the cube. Let's go forward a bit, and then we're going to push the cube forward so that it's going to hit the cube and add another keyframe. So now if we play that, we need to also grab a collider tag for this, collider body tag for our cube. Looks like we need to push it up a little bit as well. Oh, we're actually covering, I forgot about these two cubes. So seeing as we already created keyframes for this, to move this cube without affecting the animation, we can push this back. So select animation mode, and then you can push it back, and it will take into the account the keyframes that we've already set up. Back into model mode, and let's hit play. So let's see now if all of these fall. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. It actually worked out for us nicely. So let's watch this in our Redshift camera view. Let's make this cube invisible. It'll still work, we just don't want to see it. And what we can do is we can put this cube, we'll select the cube and then hold down Control, select the cloner, hit Alt-G. That'll put that into a null, just in case we want to rotate our, if we want to rotate our dominoes, our cube will follow along with whatever movement we, whatever changes we make to the rotation or position of our dominoes, our cube's going to follow along with that as well. So we don't mess that up. And let's go and put a Redshift Object tag, or tag on our floor, so that we can turn on matte, and we can, if we just jump into our Redshift view so we can see what we're doing here. Let's do a file save again, hit play. So yeah, so now what we did was we just, if I turn that off, we just turned on matte so that our floor is no longer visible, but we want to see the shadows, so just turn on shadows enabled. So now you can see the shadows are coming on there. We can mess around with the lighting of this later so it looks a bit better than it looks at the moment. And also we're going to mess around with the material of our dominoes so they look better as well. But we're just working on the actual animation part for now. So I'm not happy with the position of these dominoes. So I'm going to start moving these around. I'll undo that. I'm going to jump into my top view. And I'm going to move it from here. Yeah, so I think I'd like to see, like them starting from around there. Maybe a bit of rotation. I'm going to hold down Alt so I can make just minor adjustments here. I'm going to go the other way. So yeah, about minus 5.9 for my rotation on that. Cool. Okay, so now we can just back into our perspective view, into our Redshift camera view. We just hit play again. So that gets knocked over. And we're just making sure that our dominoes are in shot, I suppose, for the entirety of the animation. Cool. If we pause that now and play that in our Redshift render view, yeah, you can see that that's all looking pretty good. And it's looking, you know, they're on the floor, they're creating some shadows, but we're going to make some improvements to lighting and the material of our dominoes. And we're also going to be adding in for some extra believability, we're going to be using the Pyro tag, Pyro simulation, to create some kind of dust just as the largest domino hits the ground. Okay, so before we move on, some of you still might be having trouble with your dominoes actually all falling down and looking natural. So I just kind of fiddled around with this a bit, and it turns out that I'll just jump back into standard. So if I go And if I kind of play this now it did all fall the last time, but it's going to get stuck again because sometimes simulations don't always go the same way as they did in the previous playback. So if you guys are still having trouble with your dominoes all falling down, all you have to do is hit Control D to bring up your project settings. Go into the bullet tab and let's just bring down the scale down to like, not that much, down to 70. And give that a second to load. Now you can see that we're getting the desired results. So apologies for all that messing around about 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago. So scale was the answer. Just bring down the scale in the project settings and that'll sort out the issues there. So now if you want, you can even just go into your step position and just even out the distances a little bit more. Another thing I want to do as well is the way this first one is falling. I don't like it, so I'm gonna fix that now just by grabbing my cube. I'm just gonna move it up along the Y so that it's gonna knock the top of this domino. That's not the top. We have keyframes on this, so if we want to actually move that, so you can see I moved that up, but when I hit play it jumps back in. So again, what we can do is just jump into animation mode, then we're able to move this up, and then that will move from that position. Cool, so let's have a look at this now. Make our cube invisible again. Yeah, so I like that. Starts off a little bit slower as well, which is a bit nicer. Cool. So if we watch that in the RS camera view, which is the view we're going to be looking at this in, you can see it's looking a lot smoother, a lot nicer. And that's cool. Okay, so another thing I want to do as well is the very last one. I wanted to kind of, you know, in these domino videos that you've seen online before, the last one, because it's so big, so big, it kind of falls slowly, you know, like when you see something huge in a movie or whatever and it falls down, it falls really, really slowly. So I want to kind of copy that effect by just slowing down time. So if we say default camera, just about here, we want to slow down time so that this falls extra slow. So hit Control D to go back to your project settings, go to the bullet tab and go to General, add a keyframe just at about the point where this domino touches this one. We're going to add a keyframe on time scale and we're going to go to the next frame and we're going to bring the time scale down to 50% and add another keyframe. So now if we play that back, we'll jump back into the RS camera. So it's all going at 100% time scale. Then it's just going to for a bit of extra coolness, I suppose, just to give a real idea of scale of that last one. And if you don't want it to be so sudden, the change in time scale, you could just open up your dope sheet, find those keyframes, which is under bullet. Just pull this back a little bit, we'll say. So it's going along. And we'll say we want it to kick in around here. Everything starts slowing down. And then it's just, yeah, okay. So that's what we're gonna. That's what I'm trying to do there. Just try and slow down that last one to give a an idea that this is, you know, massive, basically. Let's do a file save on that. And let's go and see what our render is looking like. And we'll go and we'll start messing around with our lighting now at this stage. Oh no, before we do that, actually, let's just cache this simulation. So go back to frame 0. Let's click on our bullet tag. And let's just bake all. So that's going to take about 5 or 6 seconds. So I won't pause the video. I'll ramble on here without actually saying anything while this is baking. Yeah, so that's nice and quick. So now we're able to scrub along without having to play from frame 0. And we can see that that's baked into our cache. Cool. So lighting for this. So we are going to do something about the actual materials because we want this to look like, you know, I think dominoes, I don't really know much about dominoes or have ever even held one in real life, to be honest, but I kind of feel like they look kind of almost like piano keys, you know, kind of ivory. So we're going to do something about that. But let's focus on the lighting now for this at this stage. So I want to just go to my floor. This is my floor. And I am going to create a new material actually for this floor. New Redshift material. And I'm going to apply it to the floor. And if we just turn off our mat for a second, we want this to have a 0 reflection weight and to kind of replicate the color of grass as well. So we're going to go for a kind of a grassy color for this, just so that we're going to get some nice kind of bouncing of green light from our grass up to our dominoes. You can see it there. If I just zoom in a bit, you'll see we're getting some nice greenness on the bottoms of our dominoes, which is nice. And also, if I turn the mat back on, I want our dominoes, the brightness of our dominoes, I want the light to bounce from our dominoes onto our floor. So to do that, we're going to click on the Redshift render tag, I think that's what it's called, Redshift Object tag, and we're going to bring up the diffuse scale up to 1. So you can see that's brightening up the floor. It's kind of like making the light bounce from our dominoes onto our floor, which is selling this a bit more as well. Let's turn our mat back off now, and we can start looking at the shadows of this. So if we go to the very last frame, and if we turn off our floor just for a second, and look at this pole, right? So this is casting quite a dark shadow in about that direction, we'll say. So we want to replicate that for our dominoes. We want them to have a nice dark shadow that go in this direction. So let's turn our floor back on. And let's go to a frame where they're all kind of standing up so we can see it a bit better. Something like that. And we need to just turn or rotate the dome light. So click on the dome light and let's just rotate this to about -50, so our shadows are kind of pointing that away a little bit. Yeah, we'll go like -57, -55. And we're not going to rely solely on the dome light for our shadows, because you can see they're very faint. They're not really pointing up either. Need to go up a little bit more. And we're going to create an infinite light to give us the shadows that we're looking for, I suppose. So we create that infinite light now, and we can, let's just bring our dome light up beside it. We'll turn this dome light off so we can see what we're doing. And let's bring the intensity of this up to 25 just for the time being, so that we can see our shadows and the direction that they're going in. So let's grab the infinite light and we're going to just start rotating this until the shadows are going in the correct direction. I'm going to go back to fit window on this. So yeah, that's pretty much the direction I'm looking for on this. Something like that. So we can then turn back on our dome light. We can turn back on our mat for our floor. And now we're getting some nice dark shadows and they're going in the right direction. But obviously this infinite light is way too intense. So let's just reset this to default. And we can maybe bring it up to 2. Bring up the exposure a little bit, just to darken those shadows. Something like that. Bring down the intensity to 1.5 maybe. Okay, so now let's look at the Redshift's material for our dominoes. So if we go to original size on this, and let's just go back to a frame where there are kind of, some of them are on the floor, some of them are standing up. So we want to get that kind of piano key ivory type feel for this. So let's open this up. We don't need to open it up, just click on it and then we can drag this up so we can see what we're doing. All we have to do here is just scroll down to subsurface. We're going to put this to a weight of 1. And straight away you can see it's given us a much better feel for how these dominoes are looking. You might not be able to see it on the screen here as well. We need to bring up the scale. So you can see it especially in this one that's kind of lying down. And let's just mess around with the anisotropy as well. Yeah, so if we just bring this back to 0, so that's it at 0, and then this is it at 1. So we're getting a more kind of, we're getting more light scattering through the body of these dominoes. So it's looking a bit more domino-y, I suppose. The lighting could be a little less bright, I think. Maybe it's the dome light. If we bring down this to like 0.5. Yeah, I think that's good. And the infinite light is probably a bit bright as well. Bring that down to 1. Okay. So I think I'm liking the look of this at the moment. Okay. So that is the lighting done. We have our materials tweaked so that they're looking a bit better. And now what we can do is we can, well, I suppose we'll just zoom in and just do a quick region render of this to see what it's looking like. I'll just pause the video while this is loading so we can get a feel of what this is looking like. Yeah, so yeah, I'm really liking the look of this. I'm liking the tweak that we made to the subsurface settings in the Redshift material. I think this is looking good. So we can now move on. So what is next? I suppose next what we're going to be doing, I suppose it's the final step, and it is going to be adding the, we'll do a file save. It's going to be adding the smoke or the dust. We're going to be using Pyro for this. We're going to be adding smoke or dust just kind of around the base of this large domino, just as it kind of bashes into the ground. And then it's going to create this kind of cloud of dust. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a rectangle, jump into our top view. Let's set the orientation of this to X, Z. Hit E on your keyboard so we can move this up. And we're going to rotate this, hit R on your keyboard, and just rotate this to kind of match the orientation of the last large domino there. Something like that. Let's jump into our default camera. And let's mess around with the width and height of this. So we're just trying to wrap this around the large domino pretty much. As best we can. Doesn't need to be exact, but as exact as we can get it without, you know, giving ourselves heart attacks or anything like that. Okay. Something like that. Looks good. And we want to round the corners as well, just to match up a bit closer with this domino. And we can tweak the radius a little bit. Mess around with the width. And just pull that in a bit. Okay, so this is the rectangle spline. You're going to be using this to generate the dust using Pyro. So let's do a quick file save again, and we're going to right click, go to simulation tags. Is it simulation tags? Yeah, and we're going to go for the Pyro emitter. Okay, to change the name. So it's Pyro emitter now. Add a Pyro emitter tag, and if we hit play, nothing's happening. So let's see what we have to do. Hang on a second now. Bullet tags, simulation tags, Pyro emitter, Pyro fuel. Okay. So this is actually different to, oh yeah, I think we have to go back to the beginning. Yeah, so I think now it's going to start emitting Pyro. Giving it a second to load. Cool. So there it is now. It's loading its Pyro. So it's giving us fire. We don't want fire. The only thing we want is smoke. So we're turning on density. Everything else is being turned off. So now all we're going to get is smoke. We're calling it smoke, but we want it to look like dust, we'll say. And we don't want it to kick in until the moment that this last domino crashes into the ground. So we can say, I'm just using G to go forward a frame at a time. So just before it hits the ground, we're going to go into our Pyro tag, or no, our Pyro output object. And let's see, where do we go? Oh no, we do go to our Pyro tag, bear with me now. And then we have to go to density, and we're going to set this to 0. Going to add a keyframe. And then we're going to go forward 1 frame. That's when it hits. We're going to set this to 20. And add another keyframe. So now, hopefully, and we're still getting fire. We don't want fire. Let's turn, I thought we turned that off. Temperature off. Let's try that again. Okay, so we're not getting it now. So, to about here. That's when we want to see our smoke. Or our dust, we'll say. And we don't want it to stick around for too long. So at around this point, we're going to have it start to disappear. So let's add a keyframe. Let's play for a little bit more. And at about here, we'll say we're going to set this back to 0. Maybe we won't go 0. We'll go like 5. And then we'll play for a little bit more. And then we're going to go to 0. And add another keyframe. So let's see what that looks like. Well, you can just scrub along. See, this is the beauty of caching our dynamics, that we can just scrub right up to where we want it to be. And we don't have to wait each time. So that's dust is kind of rising, and then at around this point, it's going to start fading away. And you know, you could say that we have that dust there for a bit too long, or you might say it's not there long enough, but it's up to you to kind of mess around with the timing of this and the amount of density you wish to add to it, I suppose, as well. And remember, we're looking at this from far away. So if we scrub along here, we're looking at this from quite a distance. So it feels like that density comes in a bit too quick. It just kind of suddenly appears. So what I want to do is I'm going to slow that down a bit. Let's go to the Pyro, and we will get this keyframe, which is set to 20, and just drag this out a little bit. Let's see what that looks like, because it kind of just suddenly appears, which isn't great. Yeah, that's a bit better. And it's just kind of hovering there for a bit, which is fine. And then it does take a good while to kind of calm down. I might just bring these forward a bit. These are the ones which tell it to go from, we'll say, 5 to 0. This is from 20 to 5. So let's have a look at that, see what that looks like. Comes in, goes up to 20, and then it stays like that until it starts calming down to 5, and then it goes down to 0. Okay, so we're going to have to view this in the Redshift render view so we can see what this looks like. Couple of steps we have to do before we actually are able to view it. We'll pause it here. Still feel like that's hanging around for too long. We'll see now in a minute. We'll go to Redshift, do a file save. In our Redshift render view, let's just hit play. And I don't think we're going to see anything. I think we have to do something. Okay, so yeah, we're not seeing anything. We have to create a, what's it called? A Pyro volume material. Let's add this to the Pyro output. Okay, so now you can see we're getting our smoke or our dust. It looks like smoke, so I'm calling it smoke. Want it to look like dust. So to do that, I think what we can do is we can bring the surface thickness down to like 5. Play that. Crash. I shouldn't be trying to render that while I'm doing this. Is that working? Hang on now, I might have to just close down Cinema and try this again in a minute. Okay, I think we have it back. So let's play this. Yeah, so bringing down the surface thickness has kind of made it a bit less thick, I suppose. So let's go into our Pyro volume material here. We're going to, what are we going to do? Bring up the scatter coefficient so that it's kind of a bit more lighter in color. It's taken in the light a bit more, I suppose. And we're going to make this a bit more muddy, brownish in color. Is that working? No. Let's reset that. Could it be the color of the absorption? Yeah, maybe. Let's reset that. We'll come back to that. The emission. Okay, so we're going to go with absorption. Make this brown in color. Dark brown. No, that's not it. Doesn't look quite, it's not quite what I was going for. Ah, yes. Okay, so it was tint. For some reason it wasn't changing there. So we're going to change the tint to like a brownish color. A muddy, grey kind of a, yeah, something like that. It looks like dry mud. Maybe a bit lighter. Bit lighter again. Too light, back to where we were. Something like that. Let's just do a quick render region using the bucket render. Pause the video now just while this is rendering. Yeah, that's looking pretty much what I was going for, I suppose. With regards to timing now, hopefully that's, hopefully that's good with the timing. Hopefully it's actually working out well. Let's just do a quick playback on this. This is all fine. We've seen the go away you. Boom. Yeah, I think this is going to be pretty good actually. So it's like that at around frame 421. Play on that. Yeah, and then it starts to settle around here. Settle in. See what it looks like when it's kind of halfway settled. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And then we'll just keep on going until it's fully settled, and it's just kind of disappeared now at that stage. So what we can do is load this now into cache, and if we try and do it from frame 0, it's going to take ages. So all we do is we just basically write down in a notepad or whatever our frame range, which is 0 to 1092, and then we can open up our dope sheet and we can, at this point, just before it kicks in, which is frame 374, we're just going to trim our frame range down, and let's just play this until we no longer see any dust. Calling it dust now. So that's going to fade away. Until it's completely disappeared at around, we'll say, frame 503. And now we can cache this from here to here without having to go from frame 0 to frame, whatever, 1092. That'd take ages. This is going to take a lot less time. So if we cache the scene and just save that, it is still going to take a bit of time, but a lot less time than it would have taken if we didn't trim down the frame range. Might be an easier way to do that without having to trim down the frame range. Not sure though, but this is a good workaround just in case there isn't. So I'll pause the video here while this is caching. And if you guys are also caching your simulation, don't skip the ads because, you know, helps me out. And sure, what else should we be doing? Watch a few ads. So we'll be back in a minute once this is done. Cool. So that has finished caching now, so we can watch that. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, so all that's left to do now is just check that we have this. We took note it's 1092. That's the last frame that we have. 1092 and back to frame 0 for our frame range. So now if we play this, it goes do do do. Everything's looking nice. Let's do a quick check of what this is looking like. It's looking pretty sweet. Play that again. Slows down. This is just before the crash. And then boom. We're going to start seeing the smoke or the dust. Called it smoke again. Let's zoom in a bit. We can just render this region, save us some time. And the dust gathers and it's looking pretty cool. And then it eventually fades away. And that's it, guys. So now all we have to do is set this up for render. So we'll jump into our standard view and we will just, I suppose, decide how many frames of this we want to render out. We'll do a quick save. So obviously we want to render all of this part. And then, I mean, you guys can render it right up to the last frame if you want. Or if you want to save time, just render it up to the part at which the dust, almost said smoke, the dust disappears, which would be around 581. I'm just going to render all frames just because I'm mad. So I'm going to save this and let's have a look what this is looking like. If we go to fit to window and if we say alpha view, so obviously we want to first of all go into render settings, go to output, turn on the alpha channel. If we back to alpha view, we're still getting that. So we need to go to our camera. We need to go to background and turn that off because we don't want to see that. We don't want to see the background. And what else are we doing? Or what else do we need to do? We need to turn on effects alpha so that, you know, this is going to be transparent. And something else we need to do is turn off the background in our dome light. So now everything that's black is transparent, and then we have our shadows and all that good stuff. That's our beauty pass. Let's get some dust in there. So we have our dust, everything else is transparent. And if we just flick back to our alpha view, so this is good to go. We got our shadows in there, everything is sweet and ready to go. Do another file save, go into your render settings, So it's 1920 by 2080. The frame rate, we've already set that up. I'm going to go for all frames, but you guys are welcome to just trim that down to save yourself a bit of render time. I'm going to save this as a PNG sequence. We're not doing multipass. We're going to save this out to our folder. Sequences and Dominoes large. Redshift, we want motion blur? Yeah, I mean, you probably don't need it, but I'm turning it on anyway. Everything's moving really slow, so you're probably not going to see any motion blur. It won't make much of a difference. It will increase render times, but I'm going to turn it on, because I'm crazy like that. And that is it. Output, save, Redshift, motion blur is turned on. Now, I mean, we could go into how to reduce render times, which would basically be a case. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to render this out like a mad yoke. It would be a case of going to Redshift Advanced, and then what we'd be doing is basically cranking up the threshold, which would then reduce render times, but it would add a little bit of grain, a bit of noise, right? So to counter that, we'd turn on denoising. Now, I'm not going to be doing that. That's a whole other tutorial, and this one has been going on for long enough. So I'm not going to be doing that. But if you guys wanted to reduce your render times, what you can do is just bring this up, turn on denoising, do a couple of test frames on the current frame without saving. But I'm just going to be rendering this out, full max settings. Well, not max settings, It's set to, what is it set to? Medium, which is fine. It's going to take a good while to render out. And again, you could reduce your render times if you followed those steps that I just mentioned previous. Not going to be going into it. This is the end of the tutorial. Almost. We're going to render this out, bring it into After Effects, see what it looks like. We might do a bit of color correcting or something. We'll see. But this is pretty much it for the Cinema 4D part. So we'll pop back in once this is rendered. And obviously you guys won't have a fully rendered sequence. I might just, as I usually do, just pop in my fully rendered sequence into the description below so you can download it if you don't want to wait. But I understand that most of you guys will be dropping off at this stage of the tutorial. So if you are, please do hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, or at least consider it. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay guys, so that's finished rendering now. I rendered up to about frame 940, or that exactly. And if you guys want to download this fully rendered sequence, or 940 frames of the sequence, you can download that from the description below. So let's jump into After Effects now, and I'm going to import in the sequence, the rendered sequence. Let's bring that in, select it, hit Control-Alt-G so that we can interpret the footage. Set the frames per second to 24. And we're going to be bringing in, now I do have the movie sequence already in here, but I'm just going to bring it in. Let's see, we have it here actually. So let's just create a new composition with that. And then we can drag down the rendered sequence on top of it. Okay, so now let's watch that back. So we have a couple of messed up frames there at the start. Just go ahead, 2 frames, hit B on your keyboard, and then use Control-Shift-X to trim the comp to the work area. So let's have a look at this. So what I actually did, I created an earlier version of this when I was kind of like figuring out what I was going to do and how to do it. and I downloaded a sound effect from freesound.org, I think it is. And I just added in some sound effects on this, which kind of, helps to sell it, just makes it look and sound, obviously, better. So that video, I have it here, if anybody's interested to have a look at it. So yeah, this one has sound. So I basically used the same sound effect and just stretched the time on it, if that makes sense. And then that last one at the very end. So yeah, bit of sound does wonders for your videos, for your animations. So, you guys should go ahead and download some sound effects and add them in here. So this is pretty good. Let's have a look at that dust. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see, but it's there. I think we actually did make it fade away a bit too soon as well. But anyway, all in all, everything's looking pretty good. I'm going to go to the last frame here, hit N on my keyboard to set the work area end, and then Control-Shift-X to trim that. So a couple of things I just want to do. I want to grab a Lumetri effect, and I want to add that to my movie sequence. Double click on that, and I'm going to increase the exposure to like 0.2, and I'm going to bring up the contrast a bit. Going to go into my curves. Actually, I'll go into creative, and I'll bring up the vibrance of this. And I'm going to go into my curves as well. And I'm just going to play around with this a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And now I'm going to do the same for my Dominoes Large. Just add a Lumetri effect. Go into creative or basic correction. Bring up the exposure maybe to 0.2 again, maybe 0.1. And contrast, I'm going to bring that up. Not too much. Might bring down the highlights a little bit. And the shadows, make it darker maybe. Or leave it as is. Yeah, maybe I'll make the shadows a bit darker. And that is... yeah, that's it. I mean, we could add a little bit of, like if I zoom in here, that. If I zoom in on this, we could add a little Gaussian blur, because our footage obviously is like a tiny bit blurry, whereas, our dominoes are super crispy. So I'll just grab like a Gaussian blur and just add the tiniest bit onto our dominoes, something like that, which is like barely noticeable, but maybe a little bit more. Is that too much? Yeah, that's too much. I'll go to like 1.8. So I just realized that I wasn't entirely happy with how this is looking. So I want to set the shadows to 0, or maybe like -10. And then the exposure, I'm bringing that up to like 0.8. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Thanks for sticking around to the end, all of you troopers who managed to do so. Hope you learned a lot. And if you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.